National 5 historians, and welcome to the next lesson in our Hitler and Nazi Germany topic. This lesson is a direct follow-on from looking at Hitler becoming Chancellor and dealing with opposition, and is on the Night of the Long Knives. So what you want to be able to do by the end of this lesson is explain the events of the Night of the Long Knives, how that fits in with what Hitler was currently doing up to that point in time, and how that helped him in his kind of journey to having absolute rule and complete control over Germany at this point in time. So put a note someplace for the heading and continue the lesson. Now, so far in our story of Hitler's rise to power, we have had a few different things happen. So obviously, just in general, photo-wise, this is kind of where we are. So we've had his appointment as Chancellor in January 1933, followed by the Reichstag fire in February 1933. This leads to the Reichstag fire laws being passed, which ultimately then helps the Nazis gain more of a majority in the March elections. This allows Hitler to then pass the March Enabling Act at the end of March 1933, which gives him pretty much full emergency power and control over the Reichstag. In July 1933, he passes the law against the establishment of political parties, and this was one way of dealing with his opponents and the potential of any uprising of any sort in Germany at this point in time. This then, we talked about leading to the death of Hindenburg and things like that, but actually in between that, so we've got August 1934 Hindenburg and then Hitler becoming Führer. But before we get to these 2 points that we've already looked at, there is actually an event that takes place where Hitler more or less deals with his opposition quite ruthlessly and quite thoroughly, and establishes himself as one of those people who are not going to take any prisoners and are not going to put up with any opposition. This happens around about the 30th of June into the 1st of July 1934 and is the Night of the Long Knives. So how we're going to do this, your task is to use the next few slides to build a fact file, like a mini fact file, or a mind map if you really want, on the events of the Night of the Long Knives. There's a couple of ways that you should maybe think about doing this. You could take some paper and fold it into a little booklet and have information on each of your pages. There's some bullet points of information to note down, but there's also some mind maps as well, so you might want to do it that way so you can have it all in one place. You could choose to do it in your jotter that way and have it just as headings. Use maybe different colours, make it look a little bit interesting so it stands out. You could choose to do it on a computer and you can do it as PowerPoint slides and then print them out and stick them in if you really wanted. You can choose to do it just as a really big mind map. The only difficulty with that will be that there are a couple of mind maps already in this, so that might make it a wee bit difficult for you to include all of the information. So decide how you're best going to do this. Is it a leaflet, a mini fact file? Are you doing it as a poster? Are you really big mind map? Are you doing it in your jotter? Whatever you prefer. Remember, try and make it look a bit more interesting. If we were in school, we'd be doing this with colours and things like that, and whatever, but obviously it's up to you what you have access to. If you obviously do want to do it in colour but don't have access to things, feel free just to message your teacher and let us know, and we can put some materials for you to collect at the office. So what you're going to need is the following headings, which we'll go through in each of the slides in turn. So you're going to need a little bit of background information. You're going to need a bit of information on the SA themselves, reasons why Hitler should support the SA, reasons why he should purge them, what actually happened in the event, Ernst Röhm and what happened to him, what was the SS, because they're an important group in this as well, what impact this event actually had, and why ultimately it was useful for Hitler that this event had occurred. So if you want to pause the video here, take a minute to set up your fact file with your information, or if you want to just continue the video from here, that's absolutely fine, and then pause it as you're doing the bits and fill it in as you go. So background slide then is more or less just a little bit of kind of information and a recap. We know that Hitler was already actually dealing with opposition from places like the Communist Party. They were banned, and anybody else that actually opposed him were sent to concentration camps. By the end of 1933, we have over 150,000 people being sent as political prisoners in these concentration camps, and you can see at this little bottom picture here some of these political prisoners who were sent into these places and being greeted obviously by those that were going to take control of them. So this little bit of background shows already that he is not going to deal with opposition very friendly. He's not going to be willing to accept any opposition to him or to the Nazi Party, and anybody that he thinks is a potential political threat or threat in any other way is going to be gotten rid of as quickly and effectively as possible. Your next heading then, for information about the SA, it was led by Ernst Röhm. This is him here in the picture at the top. He was an old friend of Hitler's. They had roughly about 3 million members. A lot of them had been originally people from the Freikorps and others who liked the Nazi Party and wanted to be involved, or had been friends of Röhm or liked his kind of leadership skills. However, Röhm was actually beginning to oppose Hitler's policies, which was obviously not good for him. He criticised the links that Hitler had developed with the rich industry and the businessmen, because his whole idea was about helping the working class. Those who had been unemployed had found jobs within the SA, and this was kind of the main focus for them. The ones that had been in the army during the First World War and had nowhere to go, they found a home with the SA and with Röhm. So he really didn't like this idea of the Nazi policies really be focusing on big businesses. He felt like it should really be about the people of Germany and the working class, and he started to oppose Hitler's ideas. Now, this is fine, except that he is doing this openly, and they are starting to make fun of Hitler in publications and things like that. They're starting to publish sort of like little satirical things with jokes and stuff about him, and Hitler takes this quite personally, blames him and tells him to cut it out and get it under control, and he doesn't, because he's very much against what Hitler's trying to do, and this leads to kind of later on Hitler deciding he has to do something about it. So a few reasons why Hitler actually should support the SA then. New heading for this one. We've got a few boxes kind of coming up with some key bits of information. So the SA had been there and fought for Hitler during the Munich Putsch in 1923. They had been in existence since the really early days of the Nazi Party, so they were one of the foundation parts of that. They were very loyal Nazis for the most part as members. Ernst Röhm was one of the people that actually shared Hitler's visions of a racially pure society, which is one of the reasons they had gotten along so well early on. They had more than 2 million members by 1934, which is where this event takes place. It's actually roughly about 3 million. They had started to support Hitler and the Nazis very early on by putting up posters, handing out leaflets, standing in their uniforms and looking kind of intimidating and quite professional for people who needed either of those two things. So that drove a lot of support towards the Nazis. They intimidated political opponents throughout the 1920s and early 1930s. Ernst Röhm was personally loyal to Hitler and the Führer principle, not just to the Nazi Party. And the SA was obviously led by him, who had been one of his earliest supporters. So all of these are kind of good reasons for them to be supported by Hitler at this point in time. So if we're taking some kind of key points from this, we could say they had fought for Hitler during the Munich Putsch, the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923 that had failed, and stuck by him. They had been in existence since the early days of the Nazi Party, were loyal Nazis, or we could even say members were loyal Nazis. Röhm shared Hitler's vision of a racially pure society, which meant he would be on his side for any policies that obviously entailed. We don't need to repeat about the members because we've said that in the previous slide. We could say had supported Hitler and the Nazis by putting up posters, handing out leaflets and intimidating political opponents throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, which is an important point. Ernst Röhm was personally loyal to Hitler, and we don't need to say that again about Röhm because we know that. So some key points about why Hitler actually should support them. Obviously then Hitler has this idea he needs to purge them, he has to get rid of them somehow, and these are a couple of reasons for this. So the German army was well organised and trained, and it possessed the weapons necessary to wage a large-scale war. Ernst Röhm wanted to merge the regular German army with the SA together, That meant that Ernst Röhm was a potential rival to Hitler because it meant he would be in control of the largest military force in Germany. And he was not overly keen on that idea, Hitler. He didn't like this idea of sharing this military power. Remember, we said ultimately after he dealt with opposition, he had the army swear an oath of loyalty to him. This is one of the reasons for that. He didn't want the potential for them to have divided loyalties, which could potentially result in a coup d'etat or a hostile takeover later on. Many generals and leading Nazis actually distrust and feared Ernst Röhm, so if Hitler did force that policy and put the two together, it's likely he would face political and potentially military uprising from these generals who might take others with them, and that would then lead to potential civil war within Germany, which Hitler was not willing to deal with. If Hitler supported the German army, then he would gain the support of the large businesses in more detail as well, so that was something good for him. The SA were good at breaking up opponents' political meetings, but they're not a professional army, so he can't just rely on them and think, right, well, that's fine, we'll just ignore the German army. He needs to have the German army on side because they were the professional ones. The SA leaders were demanding rewards for their loyal service. They were angry that new party members were receiving more recognition than they were, and this is to do with the kind of starting to be politically butting heads between Röhm and Hitler at this point in time. As their membership grew, they were becoming much harder to control. Realistically, Hitler didn't have control over them. He relied on Röhm to do that, and the more politically Röhm disagreed with him, the more likely he was to lose that control, and he could not risk that. They were becoming lawless by the early 1930s and were causing some Germans to turn against the Nazis, so politically that was a bad idea to keep them. And if the SA were not brought under control, Hitler may lose the support of Hindenburg, who was, remember, the president, not quite dead yet at this point, and the powerful conservatives and the big businesses. And this was something he couldn't actually have happen at this point, not if he was aiming for the Führer position on Hindenburg's death. So all of these reasons mean that he has to get rid of the SA, or at least rid of the leadership. The members of the SA were loyal Nazis, so if he manages to get rid of their leaders and convince them to join in with the regular army, he can then control all of them. So, kind of points that we need to say then for this. We could say that Ernst Röhm wanted to merge the regular German army with the SA. Röhm was a potential rival to Hitler. Many generals and leading Nazis distrusted and feared Ernst Röhm. He was a bit of a troublemaker. If Hitler supported the German army, he would gain support of large businesses, even more so than he already had. The SA were not a professional army. You could add the rest of that box in if you wanted as well. SA leaders were demanding rewards for their loyal service. What is he going to reward them with that won't annoy someone else? As the SA membership grew, they were becoming harder to control. The SA were becoming lawless by the early 1930s and were causing some Germans to turn against the Nazis. And if the SA were not brought under control, Hitler may lose the support of Hindenburg, the president, and the powerful conservatives, and basically undo everything he's done up to that point. So pause the video here if you need to make a copy of your information for your fact file, and then continue to the next slide. So ultimately what happened? Heydrich, Göring and Himmler persuaded Hitler that Röhm was plotting to overthrow him and take over the Nazi Party. They wrote up the Reich list of unwanted persons, so people who were potentially on this kind of I'm against Hitler list, or people that were problematic in some way or potentially could be, and Röhm happened to be on it, along with a few other sort of similar familiar names, for example von Papen, von Schleicher. The people who had been chancellors obviously before Hitler had been those that had wronged Hitler in the Munich Putsch as well. Others, for example, that had taken away any sort of support that they'd given him before he'd gone to prison, including Ludendorff as well, who had obviously then turned against them. So on the 30th of June 1934, Hitler agreed that these people were potentially too difficult to be left, too potentially problematic to be left, and he arranged for the SS to kill as many of his enemies as they possibly could. So, quick note then that we need for the people that persuaded Hitler that Rome was plotting to overthrow him and take over. They wrote up the Reich list of unwanted persons, and on the 30th of June 1934, Hitler arranged for the SS to kill many of his enemies. The exact number is actually unknown, but around 400 people were actually killed in this night. 150 of them were members of the SA, most of them leaders or positions of authority within the SA. So make a note of this information and then move on. Röhm himself, a couple of bits of information about him. Because he had been loyal, and because obviously he didn't want the remaining members of the SA to rise up in any sort of aggravated state, Hitler officially pardoned Röhm. He claimed that he had been attempting to overthrow Hitler and make an attempt on his life, but because Hitler was obviously so generous and he obviously cared so much about his friends and his followers, he pardoned Röhm for this because of his services. So he wouldn't be executed. On the 1st of July 1934, 2 SS officers were sent in to Röhm in prison, and they gave him a gun. And they told him that he had been pardoned by the Führer and he would not be executed, but he should shoot himself for what he had done. They then left the room, and when they came back, he had not done it. So he was shot by the SS officers, and officially he was shot while trying to escape, even though Hitler had been merciful for him. Those that were also killed included von Schleicher, like we said, and his wife, who had been the Chancellor before Hitler, as well as von Kahr from the beer hall, amongst other people as well. So, key bits of information. Hitler decided to pardon Röhm for his services to the movement. Sunday the 1st of July 1934, 2 SS officers were sent to Röhm in prison, gave him a gun and told him to shoot himself. Whoops. And when they came back, he'd not done it, so the SS officers shot him through the throat and then again in the head. Those killed included von Schleicher and his wife and von Kahr from the beer hall putsch, as well as some others as well. So we've talked about the SS quite a bit, made reference to them, and obviously they're the ones that are carrying out this act during the Night of the Long Knives, so we need to think about actually what they were and who they were. So they first came into existence in 1925. They officially, the translation of their name stands for the Protection Squad. They were originally created to protect Hitler and the Nazi leaders. They wore black uniforms, which put them in direct opposition to the brown uniforms of the SA. The head of the SS was Heinrich Himmler, who became one of Hitler's most trusted advisors. In 1934, they were responsible for helping Hitler to crush the power of the SA during the Night of the Long Knives. They were ruthless and fiercely loyal to Hitler and no one else, even though they had a head who was loyal to Hitler as well. After 1934 and the Night of the Long Knives, they were split into 3 sections. Section 1 was responsible for security. Section 2 were units that operated within the actual official army, and Section 3 had control of the concentration camps. The SS struck fear into the German population. They could arrest people without trial and execute them and things like that after 1933, so they were really, really key to how Hitler actually kept control and kept power, which we'll talk about in a later lesson. They were meant to be an elite force. They had to be physically strong, racially pure. They were supposed to represent the master race, Hitler's ideal perfection of what a German should be and could be. So some key bits of information for this in general. We just need to know that they first came into existence in 1925, originally created to protect Hitler and the Nazi leaders, wore black uniforms. Head of the SS was Heinrich Himmler, key point there. In 1934, helped Hitler to crush the power of the SA during the Night of the Long Knives. They're going to be important for other things later on. Were ruthless and fiercely loyal to Hitler. After 1934, so this whole box is actually a key point that we need. Say after 33, could arrest people without trial. And those other key bits of information as well. So, fill in your information about what the SS were and then continue to look at what the impact of this event was. So ultimately it was a major turning point for Hitler. It showed that the Nazi dictatorship as it was growing with only Hindenburg really in its way was ruthless, and that Hitler would not put up with any sort of opposition. After this, Hitler was feared throughout Germany, and very, very few people dared to actually speak out against him for fear of retribution, and that's exactly what he wanted. Hitler had made it clear that he was the supreme leader of Germany. He was the one that had the right to be both judge and jury, and had the power to decide whether or not people lived or died, and it didn't matter if you were politically an enemy or whether or not you were loyal to him. If you were no longer in a position that he needed you, or you were potentially a threat to him, he got rid of you. Also after this, Hitler had the army on side because they were very grateful because the SA had now been removed, and every soldier swore that personal oath of loyalty to Hitler after Hindenburg's death. So very important event. You can see here we have the soldiers on parade after the oath of loyalty being sworn, carrying the Nazi flags and things. Hitler himself, in his very charming short, said, "In this hour I was responsible for the fate of the German people, and thereby I became the supreme judge of the German people. I gave the order to shoot the ringing leaders in this treason." So he's still maintaining it was treason against him and the people of Germany, and this is what he did to try and deal with it. So last kind of heading on this, why was this useful to Hitler? Firstly, the destruction of the SA pleased the regular army, which we've already said. Secondly, Hitler obviously feels personally more secure because he's gotten rid of any potential opposition to him. And thirdly, it was this kind of final important step on the road to becoming dictator. Other points why it was really useful for him. He claimed his victims had been planning to overthrow him, so it made the kind of the sympathy vote. He was allowed to decide who was guilty and who should live or die based on this idea. He could be seen as merciful by allowing someone to live, and justified by executing someone because they had been planning to overthrow and assassinate him. Later he claimed that 61 people had been executed and 13 shot, later resisting arrest, with another 3 committing suicide. So we've obviously got about 77 people dying under his orders at this point in time. So those are your notes for your fact file. I will add this video to the playlist and give you the link to it on the team as well for you to watch to kind of add to your notes. It's got some good sort of footage about what was happening and bits of information as well, and you can add that to your fact file as you watch it, and that's pretty much it. So you're going to move on then to a quick summary task for you to do in your notes, and then your assignment task for this week. Okay, summary task wise, we've got this paragraph which kind of summarises the past couple of lessons, obviously in anagram format, so we need to work out what each of them are. Normally we would do this as a class and we would go through it, but I'm leaving you guys to do it yourself. You can choose to either write the whole passage out if you want to, or you can choose just to do it as a quick note or just read through it and do it. That's absolutely fine, and then just move on to the assignment task. So assignment task for this lesson is for you to complete this comparison question, which is talking about the events of the Night of the Long Knives. Remember, with a comparison, you're looking for your overall comparison on the sources, whether they agree or disagree. Then you're looking for your simple comparison points, telling me what they agree or disagree on specifically, and then quoting to back it up to develop that comparison to get the final marks. You need to do that at least twice, but if you can find at least 3 of them, then do as much as you can and upload this to the assignment tab for this lesson's assignment. Any questions or anything that you need to ask, feel free to email your teacher, put a message into the team and let us know how you're getting on.